you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. To witnesses, thank you for being here on what is a very busy week here in the House, so I'm glad we can make time to address this issue. Look, anti-Semitism is something that has been a scourge of society. As a Jewish American, it's something I experienced in one form as a child. As a member of Congress, I experienced it in a very different form. Now as an adult, it existed for generations before me. I suspect it will exist for generations to come and continue to morph and transmogrify itself. It's imperative that we work to fight against anti-Semitism, against all hate. We're here today to talk about anti-Semitism. And I think in that fight, it's imperative, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your engagement here, that we don't make this a partisan issue. That is an issue that affects all Americans. Anti-Semitism is oftentimes the first hate. It doesn't end there. And whether you use the analogy of the canary in the coal mine or anything else, we need to address it. Part of the transformation of anti-Semitism now, and Mr. Siegel, I'll look to you on this, is Zionism, and the word Zionist becoming a replacement term for Jew. You talked a little bit about it, at least in your written testimony. Can you expand more about how it's being used and how we should work to address the subterfuge, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, for many anti-Semites, regardless of where they find themselves on the ideological spectrum, they use code words often to refer to Jews, and Zionist has been one that has been used for a long time. There are those who say that they don't oppose or hate Jews, they just hate Zionists. But what that does not account for is that 80% of American Jews, according to a Pew report in 2001, sort of recognize that Israel is a huge part of their identity. Many times the types of language and narratives and conspiracies that are used to target Zionists, those who believe that Israel should have its own self-determination in its own state, those mirror the types of anti-Semitic canards that we have seen over years as well. So anti-Zionists have a significant anti-Semitism problem. And oftentimes we see protests against the state of Israel, for example, in front of a synagogue. That tells you that they are ascribing blame for the actions of a state to entire religious community, which is classic anti-Semitism.
I will extend it. I had the benefit of a group visiting my neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. If you walk down my street, a neighborhood that has a lot of Jewish families living on that street, many of who have signs in their yards saying, "We support Israel, bring home the hostages." 291 days that the hostage has been held, and as they saw those signs, they started chanting, "Zionists, go to hell." It was clear what they were doing. And the groups that came that night, affiliated, they posted on their social media, were Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, Chicago. And Chicago has a long history, the Holy Land Foundation. And I'm going to turn to you, Ms. Burns, you're nodding your head, because it does take a whole of government approach as you described it, but these groups constantly are moving and it becomes a shell game. Could you expand on that and how we can make sure we are following the money and cutting off the flow of money to these groups who are falsely claiming social justice or a role for society?
Thank you. Certainly, these organizations, as discussed earlier in my testimony, really the foundation of the Hamas infrastructure in the United States was created here in 1988 with the blessing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it grew over a period of decades to form vast roots in our country. And the purpose of this infrastructure was twofold: to fund terror abroad and to spread anti-Semitic and terrorist propaganda within the United States, to radicalize and groom the population. They planned to do this. They planned how they would do this in 1993 at the conspiratorial meeting in Philadelphia. They recognized at that time that their organizations would receive scrutiny, they would be shut down, and they planned at that time that they would merely reopen new organizations, which is exactly what we have seen happen. It does make it difficult to investigate because they are constantly moving and shifting. New organizations appear. And these investigations are complex. This is a sophisticated network of actors, again, that span the globe, who all join together for one mission, and that is to spread their radicalization here in the United States and basically to, sow discord and destroy our democracy.
You're absolutely right. As I describe it, it may be a new name, but it's the same people, it's the same message. And I'll close with one thing that you touched on. It's not just the funding of hate and anti-Semitism and expanding their message here at home. It is the effort to fund terrorism around the world, and we're seeing it with efforts to fund Hamas in Gaza today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.